Hello, I'm Susan Elliott, the News and Special Reports Editor of Musical America. Today, we're going to be speaking with James Roe. Jim is the President and Executive Director of the Orchestra of St. Luke's, which is coming up on its 50th anniversary in a season or two, and which just re-upped its principal conductor, Bernard Labadie. He's going to tell us a little bit about the business model of the Orchestra of St. Luke's, which is very different from most orchestras, and how the DiMenna Center for Classical Music, which the orchestra opened about 10 years ago, it has impacted its programming as well as its bottom line. Hello, James. Thanks for joining us. And
hello, Susan. Thank you for inviting me.
You're coming up on your 50th anniversary. The orchestra is. And you've just renewed Bernard's contract, Bernard Labadie. So you are a very different organization than you were 50 years ago, 48 years ago, 45 years ago, 10 years ago. So tell us a little bit about your founding and like that.
I'm happy to talk about that. The orchestra really, the New York Times calls us New York's hometown band. And it's really true. This group of virtuoso musicians began playing together down at the Church of St. Luke in the Fields in the Village. And were in a sense discovered by some of the people who we're still working with today. The Caramore Festival, Carnegie Hall, we started our education work. And what really grew was this virtuoso ensemble that grew in its scope of work based on demand for its virtuosity.
Is it still of the same model that it was? In other words, there's a core of musicians. It's largely self-governing? How does that work?
Yeah, so the structure of the roster, there's a total of 100 people on the Orchestra of St. Luke's roster, and they're organized into 3 groups. So there's the core group, which is called the ensemble. There are now 24 members of the ensemble, and they have tenure, as do the next group of players, which gets us up to what we call the orchestra, another group of players that gets us up to 48. And then we have an additional list, which takes us up to 100. So it allows us to do a couple things. One is to have great consistency in personnel based on, no matter what the size group is that we need to play. And, the core 2 groups, the ensemble and then the orchestra itself, they're tenured players of the ensemble. In terms of self-governance, when the orchestra was starting out, the idea of self-governance was very much in the air. As the organization has become more complex, with real estate holdings and wide variety of activities, the management has increased in its size and its sophistication as well. Though I don't know if you know this, Susan, I played in the Orchestra of St. Luke's as an oboist for 25 years. And
I didn't realize, I knew you had played, but I didn't realize you were in the orchestra.
I wasn't a member, but I was such a regular sub that I played, multiple times every season. And my first and last professional concerts in Carnegie Hall were with the Orchestra of St. Luke's. They were playing the St. Matthew Passion, the first one with Robert Shaw, the last one with Yvonne Fisher. And I was already well into my recruitment at the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra to be CEO there when we were doing the Yvonne Fisher performance of the St. Matthew Passion. And I knew then it would be my farewell to professional playing, but I couldn't share that with anyone, of course.
Right. And Robert Shaw, wow.
It was an amazing night.
I'll bet it was. Gosh. Bernard, when the orchestra, back in the old days, they were very, very clear about the fact that there was no music director. And there never really has been. You've gone as far as principal conductor. So does that mean that the principal conductor works with an inner artistic committee in programming, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the musicians' involvement in governance in the organization is pretty broad. So there are 3 musicians on the board. There's an artistic committee. There's an artistic personnel committee that deals with recruitment of new musicians. And so the musicians are involved in all elements of decision-making for the organization. In terms of why we've not had a music director, I think it goes to our particular model, our business model in a sense, in that we have throughout our history done a lot of fee-for-service work. In other words, we provide, we're almost like a B2B business in a sense. We provide turnkey orchestral services at the highest level to concert producers. And throughout our history, I think we made 150 some commercial recordings. Most of those were made by other organizations and they hired us. And so since such a high percentage of our work was in collaboration, the need for a music director per se it didn't really make sense because most of our concerts were not under the steam of that conductor. I will say with Bernard, Bernard is an organization builder. He's up in Quebec, he started Les Violons du Roi and grew it from just a scrappy, startup to an organization in international demand. And, certainly during his time with us, he's expanded our season. He now conducts 6 times at Carnegie Hall, 3 times in Stern, and then our Bach Festival in Zankel Hall.
Has Bernard's presence sort of focused you more on getting back, because that's sort of where you started, is it not, with the Baroque and the early music movement?
So St. Luke's has had a series of conductors who have strong roots in period instrument performance practice or historically informed performance practice, as Bernard will say. And, for us to be on the stage of Carnegie Hall, presented by Carnegie Hall every year, we are up against on any given week, the Vienna Philharmonic or the Berlin Philharmonic or the Boston Symphony or the Philadelphia Orchestra. It goes on. And so when we were approaching the recruitment of Bernard, and we started with an international list of many, many people. What we saw in Bernard was a way to concentrate on a portion of the repertoire played in a historically informed style that isn't really represented strongly in New York. And so by bringing Bernard here, we really provide New York City with its internationally recognized expert in this particular style. And the thing about Bernard also is that he's an expert in creating a historically informed performance from an ensemble playing modern instruments. His group, Les Violons du Roi, plays on modern instruments at modern pitch, like we do. So during the recruitment for Bernard, Krista Benyanfini, our concertmaster, and I flew up to Quebec to see Bernard's ensemble perform Handel Messiah in the hall created by the city of Quebec for his ensembles. And we all know how Handel Messiah goes. And yet this performance was so vital, so dynamic, and so fresh that we just kept looking at each other with sort of tears in our eyes, because this music that was so familiar was speaking with such immediacy and power. And, we got very excited right then about what was going to happen when Bernard came to New York. And indeed, he's brought that kind of energy and that kind of clarity to the interpretations.
Speaking of that, you are a band for hire. Mm-hmm. You are presented by others, and you present yourselves.
Right.
So how does that break down of your quote 70 to 80 concerts a year? How does that work out?
Yeah, so I think one way to look at it would be, it's hard to talk about a normal year right now because of all the disruption. But basically now we could see ourselves doing about 15% of our concerts being presented by, and then the remaining 85 would be half and half, fee for hire work and presented by Orchestra of St. Luke's. And so that is a much higher percentage than ever in our history. And I think, you know, the pandemic disrupted so much. It took so much away from us. And sometimes when things are taken away, that pressure creates greater creativity. And during the pandemic, Orchestra of St. Luke's really flowered. It produced more original programming in 9 months of the pandemic than we had at any other season in our history. And the DiMenna Center for Classical Music was the place where this happened. We outfitted it with cameras. We created 27 programs, I think, in 9 months, all original, reaching 67,000 people. Our digital free school concerts reached 28,000 New York City public school children. We added 2 new musicians, a new board member. We had almost $3 million of campaign gifts. I mean, it was a very busy pandemic.
Wow, that's amazing. So when you say that you produced more concerts, events, many of them were small ensemble outings at the DiMenna Center. Yeah.
Yes, and when I say we produced more, what I mean is we produced more on our own. You know,
Right.
Usually in a year, others would be presenting. This time, you know, it put our own creativity to the fore. And
Right.
I think that's going to serve us well going forward, because we really see self-productions as being the future for the orchestra. And we want to step out onto the stage under our own speed in ways that we haven't in the past.
Your budget now in a pre-pandemic year is what?
So our operating budget is about $7.5 million, depending on, you know, each year it changes depending on the
Right.
amount of fee work we do.
Right. What
So-
is the percentage of the DiMenna Center? That came online, what, 10 years ago?
Yeah.
And how much of that is contributing to your income?
So the DiMenna Center itself, it costs about $1 million a year to run, and it brings in rentals about $800,000. So everyone who rents here is in some ways subsidized in their rental by the Orchestra of St. Luke's. We have
Right.
many renters, and before the pandemic, you know, we were, you know, about 30,000 musicians a year, 500 ensembles were working here.
Wow.
And about 5 years ago, we put in a professional recording studio for commercial recordings and have made dozens and dozens of feature film scores, Broadway cast albums. So, you know, this place is really humming with activity.
Let's just trace briefly how the pandemic, what the impact was and how you guys jumped into it and are coming out of it, what you're keeping, what you're not keeping from it.
Yeah, so, you know, it'll almost be 2 years to the day that we closed everything down. It was the most memorable Friday the 13th, I think, in any of our lives. It was March 13th, 2020, that we closed everything down.
Wow.
And started canceling concerts. Again, because of the incredible vision and philanthropy of our board and our other major donors, we were able to pay our musicians for all the canceled concerts that were on the books when the pandemic hit.
Cool.
And, you know, we're a per service orchestra, so our musicians are paid when they work. They're not on salary. And
Right.
so we decided that as an organization that we were going to, you know, keep them whole for all the work that was canceled. And then music production was allowed under the state of New York COVID guidelines, not performance, but production of recording and video.
Yeah.
That was allowed in July 2020, and we opened our doors then and started producing online work and, you know, learned the ropes, learned how to do it. I'm very pleased to say that throughout the whole course of that period, we had no instances of community spread at the DiMenna Center, even though we were open and working all the time. So in terms of what we're keeping, we really feel that the Digital Sounds and Stories series, being the most conceptual, the most innovative, and really kind of a creative laboratory for us, we wanted to keep that. So we're doing 3 Sounds and Stories this year, which are evening length productions. The first one was a few weeks ago. We did a mini documentary about Joan Tower and Valerie Coleman through the lens of the fanfares that they had written.
Right.
And it was the two of them together is just
I can just imagine.
So as you're listening to your pieces tell you which way to go, how do you know that you're done?
No, never done. I changed. I have pieces 10 years old. I was making changes last month with this piece, and they were like, "Joan, this is already recorded, published. You're making changes."
Right now, our current experiment, and I'm perfectly comfortable saying it's an experiment, is to try and sell tickets to these, and
Right.
to see if there's a ticketed destination audience for online work. We'll find out by the end of the year whether or not that's true. And we do know that this material is going to have a life beyond the original broadcast. We're still figuring out exactly what the
How to
distribution.
do that, yeah. So is it still a pay as you can? Was it like $1 or something in the beginning?
You can pay as little as $1 and as much as $100.
So in a sort of broad sense, since you've been you've been an orchestra player, you've been an orchestra administrator, et cetera, you have a good overview of things. Where do you think we are headed as an industry? Do you have what's going to be different? Apart from looking different, which is of course very, very important. What else is going to be different about the way we function?
So I think the key going forward, and this would have been the case without the pandemic disruption, but it was emphasized with the pandemic disruption, is that we need to think as an industry about reacquisition of audience. And that sounds maybe too transactional, but what do orchestras do? They create community around the creation of art. And during the course of the pandemic, I feel like we became very inward looking. We looked at ourselves, we looked at how we looked at what we played, and we assessed ourselves as needing to change. And then now, as we're going out, we need to very clearly tell that story. We need to talk about the welcoming nature of an orchestra concert. We need to talk about how the repertoire that we're playing can bring audience members the things that they're craving right now: connection, beauty, solace, inspiration and hope, all those things. And so I think that at this time, we have to turn our eyes outward. We have to stop being in broadcast mode and be in listening mode and welcoming mode. And that's, I mean, it's critical at this time. There's been a recent study showing that, there's always a churn in classical music audience. Some leave and some come back. We've been at a negative substitution rate for a few years, increased by the pandemic. So this is the time that we have to turn outward and welcome people back in.
How do we do that?
Obviously, Susan, that's the $1 million question, or the $10 million question indeed. But I think that it has to do with what we play, how we talk about what we play, and then how we interact with people after they've been with us.
Well, thank you very much.